The rain lashed against the windshield as Emily clutched the steering wheel, her knuckles white. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm raging inside her. She could still hear her mother's voice, trembling over the phone just minutes ago. "There's something I never told you, Emily. You had a sister." A sister. The words felt foreign, unreal. Her mind raced. 25 years of believing she was an only child, erased in an instant. A twin, hidden from her, separated by forces she couldn't yet understand. Why? How? Lightning flashed, illuminating a faded newspaper clipping on the passenger seat. A face stared back at her, eerily familiar, yet completely unknown. Her heart pounded. Was this really happening? She pressed the gas pedal harder. She needed answers, and deep down she had a feeling she wasn't ready for them. The city never truly slept. Even at this late hour, the streets of Chicago pulsed with life, distant sirens wailing, headlights slicing through the downpour, and the muffled conversations of night owls seeking refuge in 24-hour diners. But inside Emily Carter's car, the world had gone silent. She barely noticed the rain hammering against the windshield. Her thoughts were too loud. Emily had spent her entire life believing she was an only child. Raised in a quiet suburban home by her single mother, Linda, she had always wondered about the father she never knew, but she had never, not once, questioned whether she had a sibling. Her mother was a fiercely independent woman, a school teacher who had sacrificed everything to give Emily a good life. It had been just the two of them for as long as she could remember. And now, this? Emily glanced at the newspaper clipping again. The ink was smudged, the edges curled with age. The headline read, "Mysterious adoption case raises questions. Child goes missing from local hospital." Below it, a grainy black and white photo. The face was hauntingly familiar. It wasn't hers, but it could have been. She swallowed hard. A twin. She had a twin. But why had her mother never told her? And what had happened to this girl, this mirror image of herself lost to time? Emily was used to solving mysteries. As an investigative journalist, she had spent the last 5 years uncovering hidden truths, exposing corruption, and bringing justice to those who had been silenced. But this was different. This wasn't just another story. This was her story. Her mother's voice over the phone still echoed in her mind. "There's something I never told you." The pain in Linda's voice had been unmistakable, the weight of years of secrecy pressing down on every word. And then, before she could say more, the line had gone dead. Emily's grip on the steering wheel tightened. She had tried calling back, but there was no answer. Panic gnawed at her. Her mother never ignored her calls. The city lights blurred as she sped down the empty streets, her mind racing through possibilities. Had her mother kept this secret out of fear? Shame? Or was there something, someone, who didn't want the truth to come out? She took a sharp turn, heading toward her mother's house in the suburbs. The road was slick, the rain relentless, but she barely noticed. All she could think about was the past, the childhood memories now tainted with questions. Had there been signs? Moments where the truth almost slipped through the cracks? She thought back to the old photo albums her mother kept on the living room shelf. She had flipped through them countless times as a child, tracing the faded images of birthdays, first days of school, Christmas mornings. But now she wondered, had there been missing pieces, pictures she had never seen, a name that had never been spoken? The thought sent a chill down her spine. She wasn't just chasing a story anymore. She was chasing herself, and she had no idea what she was about to find. The tires screeched against the wet pavement as Emily pulled into her mother's driveway. The house stood in eerie silence, a single porch light flickering against the stormy night. Something was wrong. Emily shoved open the car door, rain drenching her in seconds. Her hands trembled as she reached for the doorknob. Unlocked. She stepped inside cautiously. "Mom?" Her voice echoed in the dimly lit hallway. No answer. A cold dread settled in her stomach. The house smelled of lavender, the same scent her mother had always loved, but something felt off. The living room was untouched. Photos of their life together still lined the mantel. The familiar couch sat neatly in place. The faint hum of the refrigerator murmured from the kitchen. Then she saw it. The phone lay on the floor, its screen shattered, a single missed call flashing, Emily's name, and a single chilling message written on the mirror in the hallway. Some secrets should stay buried. Her breath hitched. Her mother was gone. Emily's chest tightened as 1,000 possibilities raced through her mind. Kidnapping? A warning? Had someone taken her mother to keep the truth from coming out? She grabbed her phone, fingers shaking as she called 911. 911, what's your emergency? My mother is missing. Her house was left open and there's a threatening message written on the mirror. I think someone took her. The dispatcher's voice remained calm. What's the address, ma'am? Emily rattled it off, pacing the room. Every second felt agonizing. Officers are en route. Stay where you are and don't touch anything. But Emily wasn't the type to wait. She rushed into her mother's bedroom, searching for any sign, any clue that could tell her where she had gone. Then she spotted it, a single envelope on the bed with her name scrawled across the front in her mother's shaky handwriting. She tore it open. Emily, if you're reading this, it means the past has finally caught up to us. I wanted to tell you the truth, but I was afraid. Afraid of what it would mean for you. There are people who don't want you to know what really happened the night you were born. I did what I had to do to keep you safe. Please, don't come looking for me. Stay away from the hospital records. Stay away from... The letter ended abruptly, as if someone had stopped her from finishing it. Emily's heart pounded. She didn't know who had taken her mother, or why, but she knew where she had to go next. The hospital. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle as Emily pulled up to St. Vincent's Hospital, the place where she had been born 25 years ago. The fluorescent glow of the emergency room entrance cast an eerie reflection on the wet pavement. She had always assumed her birth had been ordinary, nothing remarkable, but if her mother's letter was any indication, something sinister had happened here. Emily pushed through the glass doors, her soaked jacket dripping onto the pristine floor. She walked up to the receptionist, trying to steady her voice. Hi, I'm looking for birth records from 25 years ago, specifically mine. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, barely glanced up. Those records are confidential. You'll need legal authorization. Emily leaned in. Listen, my mother is missing. I just found out I have a twin I was never told about. Someone doesn't want me to find out the truth. Please, I need your help. The woman's expression flickered with hesitation, but she lowered her voice. If you really want answers, talk to Eleanor Jacobs. She was a nurse here back then, but be careful. Some records were sealed for a reason. Sealed? Emily's pulse quickened. She jotted down the name and address the woman whispered to her. She didn't have time to waste. If the records were sealed, it meant someone had gone to great lengths to keep them hidden. And she had a feeling she was about to find out why. Emily knocked on the apartment door of Eleanor Jacobs, an elderly nurse who had worked at St. Vincent's, the year she was born. The door opened just enough for an old woman with wary eyes to peer out. Who are you? My name is Emily Carter. I was born at St. Vincent's. I need to know what happened the night I was born. The woman's face drained of color. You need to leave. Emily jammed her foot in the door before it could shut. Please, I think my mother is in danger. She told me to stay away from the hospital records. That means someone doesn't want me to find out the truth. Please, I just need to know. A long silence stretched between them. Then Eleanor sighed, glancing down the hallway as if afraid someone was watching. Come inside. The apartment was small and cluttered, the air thick with the scent of old books and dust. Eleanor sat down slowly, rubbing her hands together, as if bracing herself. I remember that night, she finally said. Your mother wasn't supposed to have twins. Emily's stomach dropped. What do you mean? The second baby, you, weren't on the records. The doctor had orders to take one of you away before your mother ever woke up. Emily felt the room spin. Who gave that order? Eleanor hesitated. Dr. Richard Calloway. He was a high-profile surgeon back then, but he was involved in questionable things. Adoptions that didn't follow legal protocols. But he had powerful people protecting him. Families willing to pay anything for a baby. Emily's hands clenched into fists. So my sister was sold? The old woman nodded grimly. And your mother? She never knew the truth. She was told you were the only baby born that night. A sickening realization settled over Emily. Her mother had been deceived. Her sister had been stolen. And now someone was trying to make sure Emily never uncovered the truth. Before she could ask more, Eleanor's face darkened. She leaned in, lowering her voice to a whisper. If they know you're digging, you're in danger. Dr. Calloway may be long gone, but the people he worked for, they're still out there. A chill crawled up Emily's spine. Someone had already taken her mother. She had to find her before it was too late. Emily left Eleanor's apartment, her mind racing. Her mother's warning, stay away from the hospital records, wasn't just paranoia. It was a desperate attempt to protect her, but it was too late for that now. Emily wasn't stopping until she found her mother. And she wasn't stopping until she found her sister. Even if it meant going head to head with people willing to do anything to keep the past buried, even if it meant facing a truth more horrifying than she was prepared for. The wind howled through the alleyways of Chicago as Emily raced through the city streets, her breath shallow, the echo of Eleanor's warning still pounding in her ears. The rain had picked up again, and the night felt suffocating, as if the darkness itself was closing in on her. She had followed the trail to a nondescript building on the outskirts of the city, a place where the veil of secrecy was thick enough to suffocate anyone who dared to pry. The address had come from an anonymous tip, one of the last pieces of the puzzle. As she approached the building, the familiar sense of dread weighed on her chest. This was it. The moment she had feared was finally here. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for whatever was waiting inside. The door creaked open as she entered. The dimly lit hallway smelled of mildew and stale air. The walls were adorned with faded portraits of families, happy faces frozen in time. But the eyes in the pictures seemed empty, as if the smiles were nothing more than a front. Her heart hammered in her chest. Where was her mother? Where was her sister? Her footsteps echoed in the silence as she moved deeper into the building. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards seemed to amplify the rising panic in her veins. Then she heard it, the sound of voices. A door at the end of the hall was ajar, and through the crack, she could see two men standing in front of a table, their backs turned to her. One was tall, wearing a black suit, his features sharp and hard to read. The other was older, his face scarred, his hands twitching with nervous energy. She's getting too close, the younger man muttered. We need to move quickly. We can't let her get any further. The older man, his eyes cold and calculating, nodded. We'll take care of her. We always do. Emily's pulse quickened. Her throat tightened. Take care of her? They weren't talking about her mother, they were talking about her. A cold shiver ran down her spine. She stepped backward, her back against the wall, trying to silence her breathing. But it was too late. The door creaked open. Before she could react, the tall man's eyes locked onto hers. I knew someone would come looking for her. Emily's heart raced, but her voice remained steady. Where is my mother? The tall man stepped forward, his presence overwhelming. Your mother is fine. But you've been digging where you shouldn't. Emily's hands clenched into fists. I'll find her. I don't care what you've done, I'll bring her back. The older man smirked. You think you can save her? You think you can take her from us? You have no idea who you're dealing with. Emily swallowed, forcing her fear to the back of her mind. She wasn't backing down now, not after everything she had uncovered. You took my sister, you sold her, and now you're trying to keep me from finding out the truth. You won't stop me. The younger man stepped closer, eyes glinting with malice. You have no idea what you're up against. He pulled something from his pocket, a small black device. One push of this button, and your mother's fate is sealed. You won't even know where to look for her. A surge of panic rose in Emily's chest, but she pushed it down, forcing herself to think. This was it, her moment of truth. The stakes couldn't be higher. I don't believe you, Emily said, her voice trembling but fierce. If you hurt her, I'll make sure the world knows who you are. What you've done. The older man chuckled, darkly. You think you can stop us? We're untouchable. Not anymore, Emily shot back. I know who you are. I know what you've done. The police will be here any minute. They'll tear this place apart and they'll bring you down. For a moment, the men exchanged a look. There was a flicker of doubt in their eyes, but it was gone in an instant. The younger man moved swiftly, reaching for the button again. Emily didn't think. She just reacted. She lunged forward, knocking the device from his hand and sending it skittering across the floor. The older man reached for her, but she ducked, her adrenaline fueling her movements. She ran for the door, her feet pounding against the floor as she pushed her way into the hallway. But the men were fast. One of them grabbed her by the arm, pulling her back with brutal force. Emily screamed, but she didn't give up. She kicked, squirmed, and fought with everything she had. Then from the corner of her eye she saw a figure, a woman, her mother. Linda Carter stood in the doorway, disheveled but alive. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. But there was something else. Something Emily hadn't seen in years. A flicker of recognition, a bond that ran deeper than any secret they had ever kept. "Mom!" Emily shouted, her voice breaking with relief. But Linda's expression was one of anguish. She stepped forward, but her eyes darted toward the men, her hands trembling. "Emily, you need to leave, now." "No," Emily cried. "I'm not leaving without you." The older man moved toward Linda, his hand outstretched. "She's not your daughter anymore. You need to let her go." But Linda didn't flinch. With a sudden, desperate motion, she grabbed the man's wrist and twisted. He stumbled back in surprise, giving Emily the chance to break free from the other man's hold. "Mom!" Linda turned to her, tears welling up in her eyes. "Emily, you have to let me go." Emily's voice faltered. "What do you mean?" "You don't know what's at stake. There's no escaping this. They'll kill us both if we don't comply." Emily felt her heart shatter. She didn't understand. "Your sister," Linda whispered, her voice trembling. "She's not what you think." The words hit Emily like a punch to the gut. "Not what I think?" Before she could ask, a loud crash echoed through the room. The door burst open and police officers flooded into the hallway, guns drawn. The men froze. "You're under arrest," one of the officers shouted, stepping forward. The tension in the room was unbearable. The officers quickly subdued the men, taking them to the ground as Emily's mind spun. Her mother's face was pale, her hands shaking. "Mom," Emily whispered, still struggling to comprehend the whirlwind of emotions and revelations. Linda looked at her daughter, her voice choked with regret. "I never wanted you to find out like this." "You should have told me the truth," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We could have faced this together." Linda nodded slowly, her eyes filled with sorrow. "I was trying to protect you. I thought I could hide it forever." But as the truth began to unfold, Emily realized there was no going back. No undoing the years of lies, no erasing the pain. But for the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of the past begin to lift. Her mother was safe. And somehow, they would find a way to heal from the truth. The sound of sirens filled the night air as the police led the two men away in handcuffs, their cold eyes filled with quiet fury. Emily's chest still heaved with adrenaline, her hands trembling from the rush of everything that had just happened. She had narrowly escaped, but the real battle was only beginning. Her mother, still pale and shaken, sat on the worn couch in the building's small waiting area, her eyes distant. The light from a single overhead bulb cast harsh shadows on her face, but Emily could still see the cracks in her mother's resolve. The years of fear, the trauma she had buried to protect her daughter, Emily could see it all now, a lifetime of scars that had never healed. Emily approached her cautiously, sitting down beside her. "You're safe now, Mom. They won't hurt you anymore." Linda nodded, her gaze never quite meeting Emily's. "I never thought this day would come. But you're stronger than I ever gave you credit for." Emily swallowed the lump in her throat. I didn't want to be strong. I wanted to be with you to have a normal life. Linda reached out and squeezed her daughter's hand, her grip shaky. Normal lives don't exist for people like us, Emily. For a moment, neither of them spoke, the weight of the years pressing down on them both. Then Emily whispered, I still don't understand. Why didn't you ever tell me? Why did you keep everything a secret? Linda's face crumpled, tears welling up in her eyes. She wiped them away quickly, but the sorrow was still there, lingering in the silence between them. I was trying to protect you, Emily, from the truth, from the danger that came with it. The people we're dealing with, they don't forgive. I thought if I kept you safe from the past, you'd have a better life. A life away from all this darkness. But the darkness found me anyway, didn't it? Emily said softly. Linda nodded. It always does. A heavy silence settled over them again. Emily was struck by how the same storm that had once felt so consuming, the one that had driven her mother to make impossible choices, had now passed. The world felt different now, lighter yet more complicated. But I'm here, Mom, Emily continued, her voice steadier now. And we're going to face this together. You don't have to do it alone. Linda's gaze softened, a flicker of hope breaking through the years of fear. You're right. She took a deep breath, as if finally allowing herself to release some of the burden she had carried for so long. I'm so sorry, Emily. I thought keeping the truth from you would protect you. But I see now that it only kept us apart. And now, I'm afraid of what's coming next. Emily shook her head. The worst is over. The truth is out. We don't have to hide anymore. Just then an officer entered the room, his expression stern. Miss Carter, we've got both men in custody. They've agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Linda flinched at the mention of the men, but Emily straightened, her voice firm. Good. They'll pay for what they've done. The officer nodded. We'll be in touch once we have more details. He turned to leave, but paused at the door. And Ms. Carter, I want to thank you. You've done a good thing today. As he left, the room was quiet again, the stillness now heavy with a sense of finality. Emily stood up and paced the room, her mind racing. What happens now? She asked, her voice softer than before. Linda looked up at her, eyes filled with uncertainty. I don't know, sweetheart. This world, it's not one you can just walk away from. The people who were involved in all of this, they won't stop. There's no easy way out of this. But there's a way, Emily said, her voice strong. A way forward. She looked at her mother, really looked at her, seeing the woman who had spent years protecting her, the woman who had tried to carry the weight of the past on her own shoulders. In this moment, Emily realized that they couldn't change what had happened, but they could rewrite the future, together. We'll take it one step at a time, Emily continued. You don't have to fight this alone anymore. Linda met her daughter's gaze, her eyes filled with both fear and hope. I'm scared, she whispered, her voice raw with emotion. Emily reached out, taking her mother's hand. I know, but I'm not going anywhere. We'll face this together. It wasn't a promise that everything would be easy. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger and regret. But the truth was out. The chains that had bound them for so long had finally been broken. For the first time in years, Emily felt the weight of the past start to lift. And with it, she felt a sense of clarity. She didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing. She had to keep moving forward. And this time, she wasn't doing it alone. As Emily and her mother sat there, the gravity of what had unfolded weighed heavily on both of them. But the struggle had also brought them closer together. The truth had torn through their lives like a storm, but it had also offered a new beginning. They had come face to face with the darkest part of their past, and survived. But their story was not unique. For too many, the truth is something that is buried deep, hidden under layers of fear and shame. There are families torn apart by secrets, by choices made to protect those they love. And sometimes, that protection comes at a cost. The cost of silence, of distance, of years spent in the dark. But as Emily learned, it's only by facing the truth, no matter how painful, that we can find the strength to move forward. It's by standing together, no matter the odds, that we can fight for what's right. As the sun began to rise, casting a soft light over the city, Emily stood at the window, watching as the world outside began to stir. The past might never fully fade, but it no longer had the power to control her. She had found her way out of the darkness, and in doing so had helped her mother find hers. Together, they would heal. Together, they would move forward. And together, they would fight for the truth, no matter where it led. As the story of Emily and Linda unfolds, the deeper systemic issues that linger beneath the surface begin to reveal themselves. The shadowy forces that orchestrated the separation of a family and the manipulation of truth are not isolated incidents. Instead, they reflect broader societal challenges, issues of power, control, exploitation, and the long-lasting consequences of silence. These forces transcend the boundaries of one family's experience and echo throughout entire communities, perpetuating cycles of fear, injustice, and unresolved trauma. At the heart of Emily's journey is a theme that runs through much of human history: the weight of silence and the harm it causes. Linda's decision to keep the truth hidden from her daughter was motivated by love, a desire to protect Emily from the dark, complicated realities of their lives. However, the secrecy ultimately stifled their ability to fully connect and heal, perpetuating a cycle of emotional distance and mistrust. This dynamic speaks to a larger societal tendency to suppress uncomfortable truths, especially when those truths challenge dominant narratives or expose inconvenient realities. From historical events such as the forced separation of families during slavery in the United States to the silencing of victims of systemic abuse, the theme of secrecy has often been weaponized to maintain control. Communities, institutions, and individuals in power have long used silence as a tool to protect their own interests, whether it's through denial, erasure, or misinformation. The damage done by this kind of silence is insidious, leaving scars that often take generations to heal. In the case of Emily and Linda, the long-buried truth was a catalyst for both healing and destruction. The revelation of the past brought them closer together, but it also opened the door to a world of consequences that would require a different kind of strength to confront. It was only by confronting the truth that they were able to reclaim their agency. But this is not always the case. Many people, especially those in marginalized communities, face the unrelenting weight of silence throughout their lives. And without a collective effort to break these cycles of silence, the wounds of the past will continue to shape the present and future. Emily's pursuit of justice highlights another critical theme: the exploitation of vulnerable individuals for personal or institutional gain. The men who were behind her mother's captivity were not mere criminals. They were embodiments of a system designed to prey on those without power. Linda's secret past was built upon a complex web of coercion, deceit, and manipulation, factors that had long allowed these men to control the lives of many others, including Linda and, by extension, Emily. This kind of exploitation exists across many facets of society. Whether it's the sex trade, human trafficking, or economic systems that disproportionately benefit the wealthy while marginalizing the poor, exploitation is often hidden beneath layers of bureaucracy and institutional power. These systems thrive in the shadows, where those who are most affected have the least access to power, information, or resources to fight back. In many ways, Linda's story mirrors the experiences of countless individuals in our society who have been trapped by circumstances beyond their control. For generations, vulnerable populations have been left at the mercy of systems that seek to control, exploit, and silence them. It is only when these systems are dismantled, or when individuals are given the tools and resources to fight back, that change can begin to take root. Experts in social justice and human rights have long emphasized the importance of empowerment and advocacy in breaking these cycles. The work of organizations like the Polaris Project and Human Rights Watch sheds light on the vast scale of human trafficking and exploitation around the world, highlighting the need for stronger legislation, victim support services, and educational initiatives to break these chains of exploitation. The fight for justice and systemic change is ongoing, and every story like Emily and Linda's serves as a reminder of how much work remains to be done. As the story shifts to its resolution, another central issue emerges: the long-lasting impact of trauma. While the immediate danger may have passed, the emotional and psychological scars of what Emily and Linda have endured will linger. For Linda, the trauma of being manipulated and controlled for years will not vanish overnight. For Emily, the discovery of the truth, the lies, the deceit, the pain, will take time to process. The trauma is not something they can just move on from, no matter how strong their resolve. This theme of intergenerational trauma is crucial. Studies in psychology and sociology show that trauma doesn't just affect the individual, it has ripple effects, impacting relationships, families, and communities. In Emily's case, the emotional damage caused by Linda's secrecy compounded the difficulties of their already strained relationship. The years spent in the dark meant that they missed out on critical opportunities to bond, to heal, and to trust each other. The impact of trauma is particularly significant in communities that have been historically oppressed or marginalized. Generational trauma is a concept that has been explored in relation to various historical injustices, including the displacement of indigenous peoples, the legacy of slavery, and the impacts of war. In these contexts, the emotional and psychological toll is felt not only by the individual but by entire communities. Healing from trauma is not just about addressing personal wounds, it's about addressing the collective scars left by systemic injustice. In order to address these deeper wounds, it's important to support mental health services, foster open conversations about trauma and healing, and create spaces where individuals can share their stories without fear of judgment or retribution. The stigmatization of mental health issues must be challenged, especially in communities where trauma is a shared experience. It is only through collective healing that real transformation can occur. A critical aspect of the story is the role that justice plays in the resolution. Emily's determination to see those who harmed her mother held accountable is a reflection of the broader societal need for justice and reparation. Justice is not simply about punishment. It's about accountability, restoration, and the restoration of dignity to those who have been wronged. The fight for justice often feels like an uphill battle, especially when the system itself is rigged against the marginalized. In Linda's case, the corrupt forces she faced had the power to evade the Haigari law for years, maintaining their hold over her life. It was only through Emily's tenacity and the eventual intervention of the authorities that these men were brought to justice. But justice does not always come so easily, especially for those who have been historically oppressed. The criminal justice system has long been criticized for its inequities, particularly when it comes to race, class, and gender. The disproportionate incarceration of people of color, the victimization of women, and the silencing of the poor have all been part of a systemic injustice that has persisted for far too long. To address these issues, it is essential to advocate for criminal justice reform, strengthen oversight of law enforcement, and ensure that victims of systemic abuse have access to the resources and support they need to pursue justice. The resolution of Emily and Linda's story offers a glimpse of hope, but also a reminder of the work that remains. To create a future where families don't have to live in the shadows of secrecy and fear, we must address the root causes of injustice, exploitation, and trauma. This requires both individual and collective action. For individuals, it means standing up for what is right, confronting uncomfortable truths, and advocating for change, even when it's difficult. For communities, it means building systems of support that prioritize healing, justice, and accountability. For society as a whole, it means acknowledging the historical and ongoing harms that have been done to marginalized groups and working to undo the systems that perpetuate these injustices. The story of Emily and Linda is not just a personal one, it is a reflection of the larger struggle for justice, equality, and healing. It is a call to action for all of us to look at the world through a lens of empathy, to listen to the voices that have been silenced, and to fight for a future where truth and justice are accessible to all. As the story of Emily and Linda comes to its close, we are reminded that the journey toward healing, justice, and empowerment is never simple. But in their struggle, there is hope. There is light. And most importantly, there is the undeniable strength of the human spirit when it is no longer shackled by fear, silence, or injustice. In every tear shed, in every painful step toward the truth, there was an opportunity for change. Not just for Emily and Linda, but for all of us. Their story is a reflection of the larger fight that is taking place in communities around the world. It's a fight against the darkness that seeks to keep people silenced, hidden, and oppressed. But it is also a fight for the truth, a fight for justice, a fight for the power to move forward together. We live in a world where too many people still face the same fears, the same struggles, the same chains that held Linda captive for years. And for every person who has felt the weight of silence, the sting of injustice, or the isolation of trauma, Emily and Linda's story is a reminder that we can break free. We can find our voices. We can reclaim our power. But it requires action. It requires us to stand up and be heard, to confront the injustices that continue to perpetuate harm in our society. It requires us to face uncomfortable truths and demand change. It requires us to offer our support to those who have suffered, to amplify their voices, and to create spaces where healing can truly take place. Will you continue to look away, or will you stand up for justice? The time is now to create a world where no one has to live in fear of their past. A world where secrets no longer have the power to control us. A world where justice is not a privilege, but a right for all. And it starts with each of us. Today. No one should ever feel that they are powerless against the forces of fear and injustice. The fight is long and it is difficult, but with each person who decides to speak up, to act, to engage, we draw closer to a world where justice prevails, where healing is possible, and where no one is left behind. Emily and Linda's story is one of strength, resilience, and the transformative power of facing the truth. But it is also a story that belongs to all of us. It's a reminder that we have the power to change the course of history, not with grand gestures, but with everyday actions. By standing together, by demanding better, by choosing to build a future where the values of equality, kindness, and justice are not just ideals, but the foundation of our society. So let's act. Let's be the change that the world needs. Don't let the lessons of Emily and Linda fade away. Take them with you into every room, every conversation, every action. Let them be the fire that fuels your resolve to create a better, more just world for you, for me, and for everyone who deserves to be heard. Together we can break the silence. Together we can heal. And together we can fight for a future where no one is separated by fate.